Welcome to JCATS, a program that seeks to introduce Japanese contextualized literature and ideas for use by missionaries and anyone that seeks to share the gospel with Japanese people.
日本人から聞く日本のキリスト教。
Hey, welcome back to JCATS, Japanese Contextual and Theological Studies. I'm John Robinson, and back for more is my friend Kai, who was sharing with us about early Japanese Protestantism. We talked about the context of how Protestantism came to Japan. When I say we, largely I mean Kai, because this I'm learning along with you here. And we talked about the Yokohama Band, which was a group of Christians that started the first Protestant church in Japan for Japanese, which was in Yokohama and is still in Yokohama?
Yes, so it was originally called Yokohama Kokai, Koen no Ko.
Like public kind of?
Yes. Which was the term that they first used for kyokai, and now we use the word kyokai for church.
Oh wow!
The term Protestants first used, or
Kokai.
in Yokohama at that time, was kokai.
Wow.
It was called the Yokohama Kokai. Now that has continued to today as the Yokohama Kaigan Kyokai, which is just a little bit further than the northwest corner of Yamashita Koen in Yokohama.
Is Yamashita Koen that street that heads into the harbor?
So it's that park that extends right along the coast. If you're going toward the harbor.
By the red brick buildings, or?
Yes. So not if you walk through Yamashita Koen toward Akarenga, you'll be walking north through Yamashita Koen, and just a little bit further off the northwest corner is where the church is today.
I'll have to take a look next time I'm there. I haven't been for a few years now, but yeah. And so you mentioned that chronologically we will be heading from Yokohama to Kumamoto, and you mentioned that there's some contrasting points between the way that the Yokohama band developed and maybe what they emphasized, and then what the Kumamoto band emphasized. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and maybe take us to Kumamoto.
Yes. So as mentioned last time, part of the context for each of these bands is at the beginning of the Meiji period, there's the charter oath saying, what we're going to do in this new era, and included in that is seeking knowledge throughout the world for the strengthening of Japanese imperial rule. So many foreigners welcomed to Japan as educators. Among them were some who were missionaries, whom we saw in the case of the Yokohama Band. And the Yokohama Band started with some of their students who were learning the Bible from them. So it was in the context of learning from missionaries, people who were educated, very capable in other areas, like Hepburn was a medical doctor, Simons was another missionary who was a medical doctor. So they were also teaching science, for example, who were in the largely the old Presbyterian, old Princeton Presbyterian evangelical tradition, and started with the beginning of a church. Now, of course, Yokohama isn't the only other place that educators were brought to Japan, and now we've moved on a few years from the Harris Treaty that we talked about in 1858. So now other parts of Japan are opened up for foreigners to come and even to be welcomed by the government as educators. the other two bands that we'll talk about, both the Kumamoto Band and the Yokohama Band, are started as a group of students who learned about Christianity in the context of the schools that they were attending. Not from missionaries directly, but because of other foreign educators who came to Japan as educators, but were also Christians. So, chronologically, the next band is the Kumamoto Band.
And Kumamoto's Kyushu, right?
Yes.
Oh, good.
So-
Those I would have to rewind and delete so I didn't sound stupid.
Yeah, if you know Kumamon, the
bear,
yes.
yeah.
So Kumamon is actually one of the highest grossing franchises internationally.
Internationally.
Yes.
Wow. In where I live, we have a blueberry. You know that's the little blueberry. That's our mascot. Anyway, continue.
Okay, so another part of the charter oath was for even the common people to receive education and to participate in public affairs, and that was directly in contrast with the class system during the Edo period. Of course, a lot of these things don't change immediately, so many of the people who started to learn under these foreign educators who were first brought to Japan were from former samurai backgrounds, which was the case for the Kumamoto Band. The Kumamoto Band started through an American Christian, Lansing Janes. Not James as in the Epistle of James in the New Testament, but Janes, Janes.
Janes.
Yes.
Wow.
So he was brought as an educator to teach at one of the schools that were started at this time, the Kumamoto School, Kumamoto Western School, Kumamoto Yogakko. He used the Bible to teach ethics, and also had a Bible study in his home. Now, again, that at the time there is a sense of out with the old, in with the new. Let's modernize. Let's learn, including learn knowledge from throughout the world for the strengthening of Japan. And so students who were learning at Kumamoto Western School were there for that purpose. Many of them had been from a samurai background, but that whole system in which they were part of the samurai class was lost, and is what will be the guiding philosophy for them at this time. On January 30th of 1876, 34 students of Janes decided together that they would convert to Christianity, and they saw this as also not only for them individually, but also for the good of Japan as a whole. And these 34 students are those who are known as the Kumamoto Band.
Kumamoto Band, yeah. That came a few years after the Yokohama Band.
Yeah, so 4 years after. So,
do you know if there was any influence from one to the other, or if it was just things were developing and rolling out similarly in different places?
Yeah. As you go on, you have a lot of interaction between them. Whenever we study history, we simplify things. History is complex, and part of the way that we organize information is by simplifying things. So there is certainly interaction with the groups, especially as we go on. go on in time. But at this point in time, it was these 34 students who were learning from James, mostly teenagers, between and some as young as 12 years old.
Wow.
So
My son is 13 now. Yeah, continue.
So, a few things to note in contrast with the Yokohama Band is that the Kumamoto Band did not start first by learning from missionary evangelists, even if those missionary evangelists were also educators, but through a lay American Christian who was teaching at a school. They didn't confess Christianity in the context of a church either. Also, even those with the Yokohama Band were learning under foreign educators as part of the same purpose of gaining knowledge throughout the world for the modernization and strengthening of Japan. That was much more explicitly stated for some of, or more among some of those in the Kumamoto Band. So one thing that we'll see as time goes on is that the Kumamoto Band, after this, had a tendency toward a form of nationalism, really thinking Christianity is what will make Japan strong in this new era.
Okay, yeah, and I feel like I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but what comes to mind when I hear that is what I remember, the little bit that I've heard about Kanzo Uchimura maybe had a similar thought about being a Christian would help him to be the best Japanese person that he could be. Maybe, well, that's a big theme in Kumamoto,
Yes.
and not such a big theme, or not quite as big a theme in Yokohama, or
Yeah, I think you see it to an extent in each of those places, and I think that's natural in view of the historical context, and also I don't think it's necessarily unusual for someone, not only in Japan but in other countries as well, for someone who believes in Christianity to think that it's something not only good for them as an individual, but also for
good for
the society
nation.
that they live in, and it's also very natural for a person to love their own country, that they're of which they are
right.
a citizen, and
It's-
to want the good of that country.
I guess it would be difficult to think of a concrete example of a believer or a believing community that would not think that being a Christian would make them a better citizen of their own nation, or that Christians in their nation would make their nation a worse nation, right? I guess that's something that maybe you would see in most historical contexts, in most geographical contexts.
On the other hand, these are some of the roots of, or even these differences that we see are some of the roots of differences of the views of Japan's imperial expansion as we go on into the decades that follow, and the different Christian responses to the expansion of the Japanese empire, including through war.
Wow, yeah.
The other thing to note about the Kumamoto Band is they started to learn about Christianity in the context of learning ethics from James. Now that was an opportunity he was able to use to teach Christianity, as he was teaching an ethics class at the Kumamoto school, Western school. But many of these, again, the students from a former samurai background, where Confucianism had been the ethical philosophy that they had learned. Confucianism was not something that everyone studied in detail in Japan during the Edo period, but it was used as a moral philosophy among the many within the samurai class. And we can see, we read some of the things written by members of the Kumamoto Band, that they thought of the relationship between Confucianism and Christianity, or thought of Christianity as a replacement for, or a progression from their former moral philosophy from Confucianism.
Yeah, I feel like I've read at some point somewhere that some Japanese Christians in the pre-war era, now I know I'm really broadening my filters here, in the most extreme cases, some may have looked at things like Confucianism as almost like a Japanese Old Testament, like that it would have led them toward a natural acceptance of New Testament teachings. And I mean, I've heard things about Confucianism, like you could make the case that Confucianism is to the East what maybe Aristotelianism is to the West. So in that sense, you might not say that Confucianism is even strongly a religion as much as it perhaps is a philosophy. And it seems like, okay, to try and focus back to where we're talking about with Kumamoto and the era of Japan where the samurai are starting to fade away and the modernization is happening. Confucianism was maybe very much part of the samurai ethic or education. So a lot of these guys from the Kumamoto Band who had samurai backgrounds maybe had Confucianist training in their upbringing.
Yes, and again, as a moral philosophy rather than as a religion, as you've emphasized. In other parts of Asia, the religious aspects of Confucianism are sometimes more prominent. Notably, after Japan occupied Manchuria, Japan made Confucianism the state religion of Manchuria because they thought that would be what was suitable for the people of Manchuria. But in the case of how it was appropriated among the samurai class during the Edo period, it was more as a moral philosophy rather than as a religion. So.
Okay. I think we'll come back to this when we talk about applications. But to the idea that I feel like sometimes comes up of using basic Confucianist ideas as a bridge to the gospel today. Maybe we can talk about your thoughts on that at the end as we summarize. Yeah, boy, languages. Summarize, not. I just keep confusing myself when I say those. So when we sum up at the end, maybe you can share your thoughts on Confucianism and missionaries today and everything. But so back to Kumamoto. If I completely derailed you, then I apologize. But.
Yeah, so we talked about the context in starting in a school and in enlisting Jane's class. Jane's was, again, not a missionary. He was a lay Christian educator. And he had to return to the U.S. fairly shortly after that, and the Kumamoto school, Western school, was closed down. So what did these students do? They hadn't finished their studies yet. Many of them transferred to Doshisha, which had just started in 1875. So the Kumamoto Band, you have 34 students at Kumamoto Western School on January 30th, who state their conversion to Christianity.
And Doshisha is a university. Is that
So now it's a university. Doshisha is the first of the mission schools for higher education, started by Nishima Jo.
okay?
So he's the next person to talk about in explaining about the Kumamoto
yeah.
Band.
Okay.
Nishima Jo. Now we've talked about you have three groups, the three bands, Yokohama Band, Sapporo Band, Kumamoto Band, who are considered the first generation of Japanese Protestant Christian leaders, or those who would become the first generation of Japanese Protestant Christian leaders. You have one man who precedes them a little bit, and that is Nishima Jo. Nishima Jo had first learned about Christianity from a Russian Orthodox missionary, Nikolai, and the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Church in Japan is a result of Nikolai's missionary work. Nishima, actually, often you'll see his name written Nijima. So his preferred pronunciation of his name was Nishima, but when you see his name written in English publications, it's more commonly written Nijima with a J rather than with an S.
And then in this volume I've got here is Nishima. I assume that's maybe just a transliteration by whoever was the guy that did this one, huh?
So that spelling is Nishima Jo's preferred spelling.
Okay.
But this is before Romaji was standardized by James Hepburn, who was a missionary working in Yokohama that we talked about last time.
Right.
So Hepburn standardized the system of Romaji that was partly based on English pronunciation. So Sashi Suseso, she is, you put an S in there because it sounds more like SHI in English pronunciation. But if you think of all the other lines in the syllabary of hiragana, it makes sense just sa and then si, even though it's shi.
Okay.
So thinking from Japanese, si makes more sense. So you will sometimes see that transliteration as well. But thinking from English pronunciation, SHI is common when transliterating for English language publications.
Okay, so just for the listener, the way that he would have written his own name before the standardization was Jo Nishima, Joneesima. Is how it's
and actually, Jo is actually not his original name. It's a name he gave himself.
Okay.
He called himself Joseph Hardy Nishima.
Huh.
So Nishima stowed away to America and wanted to learn about Christianity, attended Amherst, and then later came back to Japan under an American missionary board. And in 1875, married Yamamoto Yae. The two of them had what's called the first Christian wedding in Japan, meaning the first Western style Christian wedding. What is often thought of in Japan as the Christian wedding, or the Western style wedding.
Spawning a new industry.
What has now become an industry in Japan, yes. Because it's 1875. Yamamoto Yae is another person it would be interesting to talk about at more length sometime. She fought in the Boshin War. Fought in the Boshin War.
Was she Tom Cruise's girlfriend in The Last Samurai?
I don't think so. I haven't watched The Last Samurai, so...
How can you be giving this history lecture if you haven't watched The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise?
That's. I don't think this. I don't know how much history is in.
I'm
about
sorry.
samurai.
I'm sorry.
But if you do want to see something about if you do want to watch something related to Yamamoto Yae, the NHK Taiga drama from a few years ago was based on her life. So you can have a full year of episodes of an NHK television series about her life, including her marriage to Nishima Jo and their starting of Doshisha.
So that would have been fairly prominent in that series, the starting of Doshima.
Or Doshisha.
Doshisha.
Yes.
Doshisha.
Yes. So if you look at her life, her early life in Aizu Wakamatsu in Fukushima, part of a samurai family, fought in the Boshin War as Aizu Wakamatsu resisted.
For the samurai side?
Yes, resisting the change to the Meiji government.
Wow. In Fukushima.
And Aizu Wakamatsu in Fukushima as a samurai
They
town.
had different names, prefectural names in those days. Maybe.
Aizu Wakamatsu is the name of the town.
Okay.
So you can still go there and see the reconstructed Tsuragajo, the castle which she fought to defend.
Well, that's pretty cool.
So
Interesting.
Then
To super simplify, then she also became Christian.
Yes. So
Nishima?
Nishima had already become a Christian. He learned about Christianity first from Nikolai, then stowed away to America, received an education in theology, studied at Amherst, and then came back to Japan. Yae had Aizu Wakamatsu was defeated in the Battle of Aizu. Her brother had moved to Kyoto, and as the Japanese government was starting to develop education, including education for commoners as part of this effort for even the common people of Japan to receive an education, to be involved in public affairs in Japan for the modernization and the advancement of Japan. Her brother became involved in education in Kyoto and was employed there, and then invited her to come as well. She taught first at a school for girls that was started in Kyoto, a public school. During that time, she started to attend a Bible study at the house of a missionary, who was also with whom Nishima Jo was a friend. They met in the Genkan. He was polishing shoes in the Genkan, and she came into the house to go to a Bible study, studying the Gospel of Matthew, and she thought he was a servant, so she didn't even give him a greeting. She just
That sounds a lot like the way my wife and I met in the Genkan.
Did she?
She didn't think. No, I don't think she thought I was a servant. Though there's, you can go different ways with that. But she probably could tell I was jet lagged at the time. Different story.
Nishima Jo didn't want to marry a very traditional Japanese woman. He said he didn't want to marry a Japanese woman whose husband told her to look that way and who kept looking that way for the next couple of years. I don't remember the exact amount of time he said, but it was something like
for years.
To look in that direction for the next couple of years, just because her husband told her to look that direction once.
And he ended up marrying a warrior. So
yes, and one who had dressed as a man and fought with a rifle. So someone who was not traditional in
sounds
that,
like he got his
sense
wish.
of the term. So and study of their marriage and the relationship is another topic that is worth learning about.
Interesting.
And even the open communication that they had with each other, including about matters at the school at Doshisha. Anyway, they married in 1875 and started Doshisha that year, which is the first of the mission schools for higher education. There were other missionaries before that who had started mission schools for in other capacities, but of the mission schools that are now universities, that is considered the first of them. Anyway, returning to the Kumamoto Band, the Kumamoto school, Western school, closed down. So among these 34 students who had professed their conversion to Christianity, a number of them transferred to the newly started Doshisha, where Nishima Jo had said that the foundation for education there would be Christianity, and he saw this as, again, for the good of Japan. So you have a couple influences. You have Lansing Jains. You have their background of learning Christianity from the perspective of ethics. And then you have them learning under Nishima Jo, who had studied at Amherst in the U.S.
Wow.
He had a background both in the Reformed Church and, to an extent, also the Congregational Church. So when you see the characteristics of the Yokohama Band, it's Old Princeton Presbyterian. The influence is strong, even though there's a resistance to denominationalism.
Okay.
In the case of the Kumamoto Band, again, you don't have a denomination that they're a part of, but there's some Reformed influence, but also a significant influence from Congregationalism. And through Amherst, where Nishima had studied, and also through some of the other American authors such as Henry Beecher, that members of the Kumamoto Band read, there was an influence on social reform, which is characteristic of the Kumamoto Band.
So the Kumamoto Band had more social reform. So are we speaking sort of contrasting to the Yokohama Band? You mentioned less. Yokohama maybe is known for a pushback against denominationalism, but with a
not so much a pushback, but the missionaries there were deliberate not to import denominationalism.
Okay. Almost like just before it even took root. And then the Kumamoto Band, one of their characteristics was social reform.
Yeah, and these are very broad characterizations, and you have a lot of interaction between them, including members of both bands doing work together in areas of social reform later on. But on the one hand, the Yokohama Band, it was out of a church from the beginning. Whereas in the Kumamoto Band, they started to learn about Christianity in the context of school from a lay educator, with the emphasis on ethics. And then as they thought, how do we apply this Christianity, and with the effort for Christianity to be what would strengthen Japan in this new era, there was naturally thought, what does this mean for society as a whole? And with Nishima Jo's study at Amherst, and also some of the other authors they were reading, such as Henry Beecher, there was a desire to make reforms in Japanese society. Henry Beecher, on the one hand, he's known as an abolitionist. So, in the U.S.
Abolition in the U.S.
In the U.S. Was an abolitionist, also emphasized suffrage, universal suffrage,
Okay.
And also temperance.
Temperance.
So he
Does
was
that
a
mean
teetotaler.
You
himself.
don't drink much.
Mhm.
Is that temperance?
Right.
You don't drink much alcohol.
Right.
You're allowed to drink a little, but not much. Is that the point of temperance, or
Beecher himself was, I think, fully a teetotaler.
okay?
And
Which is a person who does not drink.
Nishima Jo adopted that as well.
Okay.
So
Which maybe would have been a little bit radical in Japan
Mhm.
at the time.
yeah.
Okay.
At the same time, Beecher was also more lenient or pushed back against what he viewed as too strict within the Puritan tradition, including as that had been appropriate into the old Princeton tradition that had more of an influence on the Yokohama Band.
Huh.
And
That is okay. So he was for women's suffrage. Beecher himself didn't make it to Japan, but his work was studied by that.
His
group.
work was studied by some within the Kumamoto Band, and he was also through Nishima. They both were connected with Amherst, because Nishima had studied at Amherst.
That's in New York. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Well, it feels like it would be New York. Anyway, I don't know. I've never been to New York.
So
Yeah.
sometimes in Japan, even today, you'll hear about the Kyokaiha and the Shakaiha. To an extent, the root of that is in this difference between the how the Yokohama Band started and how the Kumamoto Band started. With the Yokohama Band from the beginning having this emphasis on the church, and members from it such as Uemura Masahisa and Ibuka Kajinosuke becoming pastors of churches, and Uemura starting a seminary later on, that which became Tokyo Shingaku Daigaku, which today is considered the seminary representative of the Kyokaiha within the Nihon Kiristo Kyodan.
Okay.
Whereas even today, Doshisha tends to be associated with the Shakaiha.
So Shakaiha would be the group interested in social or societal affairs, and the Kyokaiha would be the group interested more in church affairs, both from a Christian perspective kind of thing, or how Christians interact with each. Is that how I'm understanding it? Just total.
Again, these are broad generalizations. Because
sure.
later on, you have people from the Yokohama Band also involved in a number of social issues. But we start to see even the roots of those different streams or tendencies, even from this time.
Yeah. So okay, just personal interest here. Do you know if Beecher's work with abolitionism had any kind of impact specifically, or if it was perhaps more just the general idea of social good that influenced some of the people in the Kumamoto? Because I mean, you still probably had the caste, like leftover thoughts on the caste system. You don't have maybe slavery, but you still think of people in categories that are maybe unhelpful socially.
Yeah, it's a very different, in a way, comparing a very different system, because you don't have something quite analogous to American racial slavery in Japan, and also the class system had already ended. Now there was still influence from that. Just because the system ends, everyone still knows what class that they were from.
Right, yeah.
And certainly people from each of these three bands who were from former samurai backgrounds were aware that they had that background. But that would be an interesting study for more exactly how that would be appropriate for how Japanese interacted with that part of Beecher's work would be an interesting topic for research that I haven't looked in.
Incredibly specific topic, it seems like.
More extensively.
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry to derail it a little bit there. I just had the kind of light bulb go off in my head.
With regard to with regard to women, that's another topic that we probably can't go into as much detail right now.
Suffrage.
Those who advocated women's suffrage in Japan was largely Christians. Women were not granted suffrage until after World War II in Japan in 1946.
That might be skipping around with Kagawa at
Yes,
some point.
Kagawa was one of the ones who advocated for universal suffrage.
But maybe he's a little later in history.
He is a little bit later.
Yeah, I mean, he's really, again, one of the like 3 people I know in Japanese history, church history. So I tend to jump in the wrong eras when we're talking about topics.
Yeah. Although at this time, not even all men in Japan had suffrage either.
Sure. Oh. Okay. Wow. Okay, so I think that you've already basically sort of summarized. I said it again. My goodness, summarized some of the main ideas that were important to the Kumamoto Band, and then you mentioned some of the important people, and maybe Uemura Masahisa comes out of that, or maybe
he's from the Yokohama Band. Some of the
I wrote down on my paper Yokohama, and then it's right next to that guy's name.
Yeah, among those major figures within the Kumamoto Band, Ebina Danjo is one of the best known. Not only because he's prolific and involved with the Christian community following them, but also due to controversy, including exchange between him and Uemura from the Yokohama Band.
Okay.
Regarding Christology.
Right. Yeah. So I was just mildly familiar with that as well, and it may be very simplified, the stuff that I read about concerning that. So with the Kumamoto Band, again, I feel like maybe the overall summary is coming at the end of the 3 bands talk on what we can learn or not learn. But if there's any more things before we move on from Kumamoto that you think would be useful, then
one more thing to note, and this is a little bit after the Kumamoto Band starts. Again, the Kumamoto Band started in 1876 with 34 students. In 1885, missionaries from the Evangelische Protestantische Missionsverein from Germany came to Japan, and some of the members of the Kumamoto Band were influenced by the missionaries from that band. From the Missionsverein. It's not band. Band is I'm talking about missionaries.
Okay.
No, missionaries from Germany.
Missionaries from Germany.
Yeah. Now the Evangelische Protestantische Missionsverein had been started by people within the Religionsgeschichtliche Schule in Germany, which has applied in some ways a simplistic appropriation of philosophies of history, particularly associated with Hegel, to the understanding of the history of religion and Christianity. Trying to interpret history according to a process of progress, of development. Without getting into 19th century German philosophy too much, this came they were from what would be considered, in the technical use of the term, liberal theology.
Is that after
After
Schleiermacher?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although the interpretation of history was more evolutionary.
Okay.
So, seeing Christianity as, again, from an appropriation of philosophies of history associated with Hegel, where you have thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis, although that's not from Hegel himself, it's actually from Fichte, another philosopher, having Judaism and Greco-Roman religion as a thesis and antithesis, that out of which Christianity emerged as a synthesis.
Okay.
And even seeing this as developing over time, where there's an evolutionary process toward an ideal.
And this German group brought this thought to the
Yes.
Kumamoto Band.
Along with in the technical sense of the term, liberal theology. So this is very much in conflict with the old Princeton evangelicalism of the Yokohama Band.
So, and if I can just super simplify what we're talking about when we talk about sort of classical historical liberal theology, it would be more of a non-literalism, or it would be how would you explain for the listener when we're talking about like classical historical liberal theology? In my mind, I go to Schleiermacher, and I'm not even sure if it's Schleiermacher. Oh, good, because I didn't want to sound stupid in front of everyone, by saying Schleiermacher incorrectly. In my mind, I go back to that, and that's where I start living. And you're maybe saying we go back a little bit further philosophically, but if you could like super simplify the concept of historical classical liberal theology that's going over here, how would you explain?
I think without getting into a lecture on German theology, one of the things that we see is, at that time, it's a question of, particularly in the case of Ebina Danjo, is it how to understand his Christology. For Ebina Danjo, one of the things that very much connected with him in his background from Confucianism, and this is, again, not so much German theology as much, but as far as that, a way he was able to appropriate what he learned about Christianity in a way that wouldn't have been done as easily in, say, the old Princeton evangelical edition of the Yokohama Band. One of the things that connected very much with him from his Confucianist background is understanding God as Father and the responsibility of filial piety, which is a significant moral principle in Confucianism. And as God is Father, that is, he is to live according to that principle of filial piety. But his understanding of Jesus was not of Jesus as divine.
Okay.
So this is where that is within that tradition of liberal theology. It would have been possible to say that Jesus historically was, in some sense, an ordinary person,
human.
and for Ebina Danjo, who was introduced to Christianity through learning ethics was able to view Jesus as in view of moral teaching, such as in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, and other passages from the Gospel, and could see Jesus' exemplary relationship as Son to the Father. But ended up not accepting the Trinity as part of his understanding of Christology. So that became a major point of debate between him, a conflict between him and then Umera from the Yokohama Band.
All right. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like how my mind listens to this is almost like I'm trying to listen to it like a storybook, and from the perspective of a Christian who believes Jesus is God, and traditional Christology, yes, Trinity, yes, Apostles' Creed stuff. Are there other guys in the Kumamoto Band that I might be more excited about? I mean, you mentioned Joe Nishima and his wife, who sound like really exciting people to learn about. Is there some others that you would think would be more exciting to the traditional Christians?
Yeah, Ebina Danjo is certainly someone to study and to understand because of his historical significance in Japanese Christianity, but just because he was one person who didn't adhere to the Trinity as as historic doctrine of Christian faith. That doesn't mean that many of the other people in the Kumamoto Band didn't. Kozaki Hiromichi would be an example of one of the ones who did accept the Trinity according to her understanding of historical Christian faith. So.
Cool.
And there are others that could be mentioned as well. Again, this is the largest of the three bands, 34
It
students.
Sounds like it, right? Because you
teenagers,
mentioned
some as young as
Yokohama
12.
was like 11 at the start.
Yes.
And so that's like 3 times. It can change. Well, I think time-wise, maybe we're at our limit for this time. Maybe look forward to talking the Sapporo Band next time, and maybe some overall thoughts from that period of history, if that if that works. Okay, well, thanks Kai, and thanks to all of you for listening. See you next time.